he the first U.S. president in history to be impeached twice while in office. He also is the first former U.S. president to be criminally charged. Days after a New York grand jury indicted him, Trump is now going to be surrendering in the Manhattan court in just a short while from now. Donald Trump faces more than 30 counts related to business fraud in that indictment. The investigation by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office began when Trump was still in the White House and in office. It relates to a $130,000 payment that was made by Trump's then personal attorney, Michael Cohen, to porn star Stormy Daniels in late October 2016. This happened days before the presidential election, allegedly to silence her from going public about an alleged affair with Donald Trump a decade earlier. Now, Donald Trump has denied that affair. Hush money payments aren't illegal, at least in the United States and some parts of it. There have been other historical events where hush money payments have been made, and those have become public as well. But ahead of the indictment, prosecutors were weighing whether to charge Trump with falsifying business records of the Trump Organization for how it reflected the reimbursement of payment to Cohen, who said he advanced the money to Daniels. To prove the case, prosecutors would need to show Donald Trump intended to commit a crime. Meanwhile, Trump himself has blasted the indictment, vowing to defeat the left and crooked Democrats, as he called them. He said in a statement, and I quote, "I believe this witch hunt will backfire massively on Joe Biden. The American people realize exactly what the radical left Democrats are doing here. So our movement and our party, united and strong, will first defeat Alvin Bragg and then defeat Joe Biden. We are going to throw every last one of these crooked Democrats out of office so we can make America great again." That's the statement that came to the fore from Donald Trump. Listen in to what his attorney had to say just minutes before we see Trump enter the Manhattan courthouse.
There's no indication that there will be a gag order. It can't happen in this case. Look, when you have a gag order, you have to balance a couple things. The First Amendment, right, which is important to all of Americans, and the right to a fair trial for both sides. So that's a balancing act. Here you have something uniquely different. The defendant is the leading Republican candidate for the office of the President of the United States and will be campaigning. Hard to put a gag order when he's going to be fielding questions about his current legal situation. So, but there's been no indication that there'll be a gag order imposed or even attempted to be.
I'll travel around anywhere on the East Coast to see him. He does his all for us. I'm going to give my all for him. You know, I'm not giving up. We need him back. This economy's a joke. I went shopping last night and I broke my bank account. So it feels like the right thing to do. You know, he's got enough supporters, but he could always use more. And it just means the world to me. It makes me feel like I'm a part of something too.
Donald Trump's arraignment is going to happen shortly, and joining me on this broadcast is a very special guest who is the Nixon-era White House counsel, also a Watergate whistleblower, John Dean. Thank you so much for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. And we do know that New York grand jury broke historical precedent when it indicted the former U.S. president. Now, the formal indictment is still under seal, so we don't really know what the specific charges are that he faces yet. But to put this in context for our Indian viewers here, could you elaborate on how big a deal this really is?
Is that question to me?
Yes, Mr. Dean, go ahead.
Okay, fine. We do not know the details yet. We have some indication of the parameters that there will be 30 counts, criminal counts, felony counts in the indictment, and we'll all learn about the same time in a very short while. So it's an unprecedented step. We've never had a president or former president who's been indicted. We have been close before, but never has any prosecutor ever brought this action. When I say close, Richard Nixon, my president, they were drafting, the Watergate Special Prosecution Force was drafting an indictment, but when his predecessor, his successor, Gerald Ford, pardoned him, they stopped drafting because they could bring no action at that point. There'd be no basis for a criminal charge. It also happened during the presidency of Bill Clinton, where they thought he had lied in front of a grand jury that was investigating his relationship with a young lady named Monica Lewinsky. He later would confess that he did lie, but they worked out a deal to not prosecute him and merely have him admit his wrongdoing, and that would be sufficient. But we've never been to an indictment before.
Yes, and that's really why it's such a big deal. We're also learning that we could be seeing Donald Trump actually give a soundbite perhaps while he walks the corridors of the lower Manhattan court. Do you think he's going to, make a big spectacle out of this, try and mobilize his core voters by playing the victim card?
He has a long practice of trying to use his worst moments for political advantage. Why people would be attracted to the fact that he's gotten himself in trouble, why they're sending money to him, it's not everybody, including me, understand. The Republican Party used to be the party of law and order. Here they're openly embracing a type of corruption that many Americans are finding surprising. In the long pull, in the long run, when it gets back to the November elections, if Mr. Trump is the nominee, no one really believes this is going to be to his advantage. It's a short-term gain he's getting, if any.
Sure. So many believe that he's not going to actually win even if he is nominated. But do you think that kind of sympathy card that he's trying to play or making that entire spectacle is actually going to get him that nomination from the Republican Party? Because hush money paid to a porn star is something that's difficult to get consensus on. So I want to ask you what you think the 2024 presidential race really will look like.
Well, Donald Trump's base is very supportive of him. He's a clear authoritarian personality. He's attracted authoritarian followers, people who want to be told how to think and what to do. And so he has a lot of appeal to these people. Now, while he can get the nomination, that isn't enough to get him elected. So there's a big difference. And while these people might support him for the nomination, to get through the general election, it's doubtful this behavior is going to be advantageous at that point.
Sure. Advantageous or not, all eyes are, of course, on this particular case when it does go to trial, not just in the United States of America, but in the rest of the world as well. How difficult is it going to be to actually prove these charges against him, do you think?
You know, we don't know, but we do know that the prosecutor who's bringing these first set of charges, and there are other investigations ongoing as well, but this first prosecutor is a very careful man. He's new in the job, he's elected to that post, and it's very unlikely, given the history of this office, that he wouldn't bring a very strong case. We don't know the case at this point. There's been a lot of speculation that's going to relate to the former president paying hush money to quiet a woman with whom he had an affair, a porn star no less. But we don't have all those details or how he has formed the case, built the case. But we do know he's not likely to have just thrown something out there that he doesn't think he can win. And indeed, the grand jury that actually did the indictment, they too were convinced this was a very winnable case.
Sure, winnable or not, we'll find out soon enough. That arraignment is going to happen in just a few minutes from now. But it was a pleasure speaking to you, John Dean. Thank you so much for speaking with us here and putting that in perspective for our Indian viewers as well.
Pleasure.
Now, let's take you step by step, viewers, of what exactly is expected tonight. We do know, and in about 5 minutes from now, in fact, is when Donald Trump will be leaving Trump Tower and making that 6-mile journey to the lower Manhattan court. He will turn himself in that courthouse where he will be taken into custody. But it's not like what we see in the movies. He will not be put into handcuffs. We're learning that the former president will, however, be fingerprinted. His mugshot will also be taken. That mugshot is something that I'm sure the paparazzi waiting there is eagerly waiting for it to be out. He then will be read his Miranda rights, which is basically informing him that he has the right to get a lawyer or refuse to talk to the cops. All throughout the process, he will be accompanied by Secret Service agents since he is the former president of the country. He then will be made to wait in a holding area or a cell until he is due to appear before the judge. What happens then? Trump will then appear before a judge for an arraignment. Let me tell you what that is. It's generally the first time a defendant appears in court after being charged. The judge will then brief Donald Trump on the charges that he faces and advise him about his right to go to trial. Trump will enter a plea of not guilty as confirmed by his legal team. That's pretty standard for defendants to do during an arraignment. He then has repeatedly denied any wrongdoing. So that's perhaps what he is going to do inside the courtroom, outside perhaps as well. The judge will then determine the condition of Trump's release. Since he doesn't have any prior offenses, he's most likely to be released today itself, just in a few minutes after that arraignment happens. Reporting live from New York, outside that court, is my colleague and associate with CNN News 18, Erica Tulfo. Thank you so much for joining us here and giving us a sense of what's happening there. In just a few minutes from now is when we're going to be seeing Donald Trump leave the Trump Tower and make that 6-mile journey to the lower court. Are we expecting him to perhaps brief the media there before he actually enters the courtroom?
Well, it seems like whether that's going to be possible or not really depends. As you can see, there are a lot of security personnel here, as you can see. And of course, he is going to be surrounded by federal agents. I know that I can speak to the amount of protesters in the park across from the Manhattan Criminal Court. So I'm sure that they're all eagerly awaiting. Other than Trump, there have been other high-profile appearances. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene and George Santos have both made appearances. But as for Trump himself, all we can do right now is sit and wait.
Right, it is a wait-and-watch game as of now. We do know that, as John Dean was also pointing out, Donald Trump is someone who's known to make a spectacle out of the worst circumstances that he is in. So we perhaps could be expecting him to make that statement. But so far, Erica, have you been able to spot any of the prosecution lawyers or any of Donald Trump's legal team that has already reached the courthouse?
No sign yet of any of Trump's legal teams. Right now, the only people gathered here, other than the two individuals I talked about earlier, and the protesters, are the media and the police. So far, nothing else, but I'm sure activity is sure to amp up once those members make their way into the courthouse. We do know that live broadcast inside the courthouse has not been allowed by the judge, but 5 photographers will be able to take still photos before the actual arraignment.
Right, so there is scope of some of those photographs to come out while that arraignment happens, or perhaps in just a few minutes after that. Now, Erica, you did speak to some of the protesters or the supporters of Trump who have already gathered there. We saw the kind of sentiment when he was leaving his home in Florida. Now we see that similar scene in New York as well.
Yes, definitely a very similar scene. I was actually here earlier this morning and there was a very small crowd gathered. But of course, as we are nearing the time of his actual arraignment, set for 2:15 this afternoon, that number has just swelled. So there are a lot of people in the park across from the court wearing hats and wearing flags that are in support of the former president. Right now, they have music playing. Right now, they're all being sequestered in that park. The NYPD is sure to be keeping an eye on them, but as of the moment, there has not been any reports of any particularly raucous or alarming bits of violence.
Sure. So for now, scenes are quiet there. We'll wait and watch as to what happens. It's just a matter of time. Erica, thank you so much for getting us the latest from on ground there. We'll keep coming back to you, of course, to get us the latest. But here's what is going to happen. After the hearing, Trump is expected to fly straight back to Mar-a-Lago, from where he is going to be delivering a speech. So whether he speaks or not to the media from the courthouse today, he definitely is going to go back to Florida and do so. He's likely to talk about how the indictment and the arraignment are a bit to trip up his chances of running for office again. But can that really happen? Can this actually spoil his chances? Technically, no, since there is nothing in the American laws that stops a convicted or even a jail candidate from running for office. But it's complicated because it won't be easy for Donald Trump to campaign for votes or take part in debates like any normal candidate. That, of course, if he actually wins the Republican nomination. Trump has given every indication that he will be pushing on with his 2024 bid. But this is expected to only deepen the divide within an already fractured US political system. So this is going to have an effect definitely on the 2024 presidential poll. Whether it's going to have an effect on American politics for the years to come, that is something that we will have to wait and watch out for. Political reaction